Hey, how you guys doing? So this is Neil from masterpaintnow.com bringing you another free art lesson. I'm one of the top art instructors on Udemy with over 30,000 happy students, all growing and learning. So grow with us. All right, let's get started.
Alright, so welcome to the Digital Bob Ross. We're going to be relaxing here and just doing some nice calming brush strokes, painting a cool sunset in Bob Ross style. I'm using PaintStorm here, and anyone can follow along and do this with me. This is painted in real time. You can actually follow right along with Bob Ross using these techniques. So the first thing I do is I lay down a nice kind of orange-red color with the cloud brush, and then I use the cloud blender brush to kind of blend it into a dark, kind of reddish background. The background color was chosen with using it almost red color and then going all the way down to the right side of the slider and almost to completely black. Then I'm using my awesome blender brush in little circle motions to blend out the edges so that it's even more smooth than using the cloud smoothing brush. I don't want to use anything resembling an airbrush because I want there to be texture to this because we're going for an oil painted look. Just kind of blending it out because we want to get that nice sunset kind of feel here, or sunrise. It's really nice when you start with a dark canvas, it can give you really interesting results. If you notice that sometimes your cloud brush isn't working right, make sure to check the brush form and see if eraser is checked. You can turn any brush into an eraser and it will remember your settings, so you have to remember to turn it back to turn that eraser setting off. Otherwise, like I did, you'll go to paint something and then it'll erase instead of paint. Sometimes these processes in PaintStorm take a little bit longer than if you were using an actual oil brush on canvas. But there are other things that I can actually do faster than Bob Ross can do, so there's kind of a give or take. So far, only one time have I been able to keep up with Bob Ross, or one time I actually tried to keep up with him, and I was able to. And so I finished the painting in the same time Bob Ross did, never having to pause the video. But it wasn't as relaxing, it was kind of a little more nerve-wracking. So now I'm picking here the second or the third bushes brush in my brush pack, which you can get for free by signing up to the newsletter at masterpaintingnow.com, and then just sign up to the newsletter and it'll come in your email, the brush pack, to download. It's a really awesome experience to be able to just sit down and, typically for me, within about 40 minutes to an hour, finish an entire Bob Ross painting, either by following him or just painting one from imagination. And then you can take the time to fine-tune it if you want to make it look even more polished. So here for the background shadows of the bushes, as Bob Ross says, you need to have dark to show the light. I use a really, really dark red color, almost like a reddish brown. Then I'm going to add some highlights here using kind of a green yellow. And typically, and if this was done to look and resemble real life rather than to resemble the almost kind of, I don't know, surreal look that Bob Ross shoots for, whether he did it on purpose or not, I don't know. But this would typically be all reds and oranges. Even though the bushes are green bushes, we wouldn't see green bushes at this time of day when the sun is almost set or just barely rising. we would see something that looks more like orange, especially if they're further away. But nonetheless, it works. The effect works. It looks really nice to have this kind of, a little bit of green in there. It adds a really interesting look to it. So you just want to push that paint around in nice little, almost like dabbing circular motions. This will make sure they don't get too much texture. Now I'm using bush number 4 that if you don't have this particular brush yet, it's because it's a newer brush that I made. But you just go ahead and re-download the PaintStorm brushes and it'll be there. It won't be in Krita. It's not nearly as good of a program to do the Bob Ross style with. But if it's all you have, then that's okay. You don't have to use this bush brush here. You can use a different one. Krita has a different brush system altogether, so it works a little differently. But you can still do exactly what I'm doing with the brushes. Just use a different bush brush. It's okay. Just making some nice relaxing little bushes, and we're just going to kind of make them in rows as if they're moving away from us. Adds depth to the painting. As you saw in the beginning, what the painting will look like when it's done. I like to do that because that way people know right away what the painting's going to look like, what they're shooting for. I'm adding some more really dark. You can see there it's kind of an orange color, but then I'm all the way down, almost all the way to black, but not quite. And that allows us to add more shadows over the bushes there. Now we're going to add a little bit of reflections into the water, and the main thing that's going to reflect into the water is going to be the colors of we'll call it a sunset. But notice I kind of pick up some of the colors. I purposely pull from the bush color as well, and I pull some of those browns and greens right into that sunset color. And then using one's vertical, one's horizontal. This is the vertical brush. Just very lightly stroke across from one direction or the other, either left or right, and just kind of pull it across. You don't want to destroy all the downstroke information. You just want it to look like there is this movement, horizontal movement that water has to it. Then after this, we'll add some of the bush texture into the water as well, and then repeat the same technique here. So now I'm actually putting just a little bit of pressure so I can add just a little bit of yellow to the water as a reflection. And then lightly touching it, just barely touching the canvas to use it more like a blur or blend tool and just kind of blending it in. So now we're going to add a little bit of the bush texture by just tapping this brush and just pushing down and just tapping ever so slightly to add some of that kind of greenish color and texture of the bushes. And then once that's done, we're going to go ahead and lightly blend that again with the vertical brush. If you don't see these brushes, it's really just the same brush that is there at the bottom. I just created 2 copies of it and put one in the vertical orientation and one in the horizontal. And then I turned off the attributes of, I forget what it's under right now, but the brush attributes for being able to move the brush around with the tilt. I highly recommend to download the new brush pack if you don't have those brushes there. You can just re-sign up to the email. It's not gonna like double sign you up or anything. And that will give you that link again so you can download in your email, so you can download the new brush pack. Sometimes when I'm making water, I'll put down the texture information that I want in the reflections, and then I'll use my awesome blender and just lightly go over it in a horizontal fashion as well, and that works good too. Give you this nice, kind of watery look. So now we're gonna make a couple trees here. I'm using that background, that dark background color that I had. I just sampled it with vertical strokes here, using that vertical tree brush there, then using the horizontal tree brush. I show in other videos exactly how to do trees. I'll show here after these trees in orange how to the brush strokes that I'm making. It's kind of a seesaw stroke that I'm doing back and forth. And then if I need more detail into the tree, I can go back in and just add slight little, almost like dabbing strokes to the edges to kind of add some of that texture to the end of those trees. Remember, these trees have spacing between them, like separations between the pine or fir trees. This is how Bob Ross paints them. So we're just using that exact same technique here. It's actually really easy. At first it's a little, it might take you a little while to, just like with the traditional fan brush. It's really easy to do, but it takes a little bit of practice. It's not something you're just going to get on your first try. Your first few trees might look really, really weird. So here's that seesaw motion that I'm using to create the tree. And then I'll show again in a little more exaggerated, larger stroke pattern here what I'm doing, and slower, like that. So that's kind of what I'm doing, but I'm just keeping them a little bit closer together, and I do it really fast. Then I go back in and I add some information on each side of those strokes, and you can see it creates that tree pattern. So that's what I'm doing. You want to just practice trees. Just fill up a whole canvas full of nothing but trees of different sizes, and until you feel like your trees are looking like trees, and then you can start adding them to your paintings. Or at least then your paintings will start looking better because your trees will look like trees. We'll do another happy little tree right here because, trees need friends. And we need places for the squirrels to climb and jump and play. So we're just going to add a little happy tree for that squirrels. And it's way there, it's way off in the background. Notice I have the larger trees on the right, and I have that smaller tree on the left. It kind of gives this depth that those bushes are further away. Decided to go ahead and add a tree at an angle now. You can, in this case, you want to use the angled brush. You can tilt it and move it around. If you don't have tilt function, you're going to have to manually change the angle of the brush so you can do an angled tree. It adds some variety to your painting. Sometimes trees grow at angles. Sometimes they kind of fall over a little bit and their roots still hold them together and keep them alive. So now I'm using this is basically my water edge brush. So I keep it at the very bottom. And you want to just do little strokes. You want to break it up a little bit. You don't want it to just be one constant stroke. And this simulates using the knife brush, or not the brush, but using the knife tool in oil painting when Bob Ross just kind of puts his waterline out there. And notice he just kind of touches here and there. He doesn't just do a straight line across, because the land is never just straight. So you want to kind of follow the angles of the land. So you kind of come forward a little bit and back a little bit, and that creates this look here. Now I'm gonna add the base for some really big bushes and trees now, using a really dark color, the same dark color that I use for the shadows of the bushes. It's almost barely visible. If you're having a hard time seeing this color on the screen, I recommend adjusting your brightness a little bit. Just turn it up. But most people have their brightness up already by default. I tend to turn mine down quite low because I don't like the bright lights in my eyes. Gives me headaches. Sometimes I even wear sunglasses at the computer, and that helps a lot because it blocks the UV light. If you ever find yourself getting headaches from being at the computer or staring at any type of tablet or anything like that, try wearing some UV protective glasses. You don't have to wear like dark sunglasses, just they can even be clear glasses. Just ones that have the UV protection on them. And you might find that you can sit at the same device for a lot longer or stare at the same device for a lot longer without getting eye strain or headaches. It's also better for your eyes in the long run. Now with the mountain textured brush, or we can just call it the textured knife brush or textured knife tool, I'm going to scratch in some branches here, but in this case we can actually add color onto it. And so I'm basically just painting in some thin branches that are the background, the very dark color of the background, so it's not pure black. It's more like a Van Dyke brown, which is very dark brown that almost looks black. And then adding some highlights on the proper sides, because it's, the highlights are coming from the sun in the center. So it's going to highlight the left-hand side of the right branches and the right-hand side of the left branches. And always make sure to paint in your branches first. It just makes it easier, because then when you paint on the actual color for your bushes, you're going to go right over some of the branches, and that way they look like they're poking in between the bushes. I'm going to use the number 4 bush tool again, and just lightly, little circle dab motions, and just kind of dab around. It's very similar to the technique of using the 2-inch brush and just using the corner of it and kind of pressing into the canvas, dabbing into the canvas. But in this case we use a slight little circle and dab motion together. And using those two together, you get a nice bush effect. You don't want the texture to be too sharp. And to get an idea of what the difference is, try using your mouse and just like left clicking a couple times, and you'll see that the bush texture looks far too sharp. But using this technique, and this is a technique like any other technique, just like with a 2-inch brush, it takes a little bit of time. You can't just expect to pick up oil brushes and start painting bushes like Bob Ross your first try. It takes a little bit of practice. It's a technique, but it's a technique that anyone can learn. This type of painting isn't something where you have to be born with artistic talent. If you have just a little bit of hand-eye coordination, then you can master these techniques in a short amount of time, and you can start painting these kinds of paintings. Now, you might not be able to paint a landscape from your imagination, and that's okay, because Bob Ross has hundreds of videos of different landscapes you can follow. And what you'll notice is the more you paint along with me, and the more you paint along with people like Bob Ross, the more your imagination will expand. And if you just one day try to paint one from imagination, you might be surprised at how good it comes out. I remember my first painting that I decided, landscape painting that I decided using the Bob Ross method, to just paint out of my imagination. I really wasn't expecting it to be something I would keep. But just in case, and I recommend doing this if you're working digitally, just in case, do it big and make sure it's at a printable size. And if you're working traditionally, make sure that it's on a decently a good sized canvas, a canvas that you'd want to keep and hang, because it might end up turning out really good. And that's what happened in my case. The end result came out really, really nice. I was really surprised that what came from my imagination was really cool, because I had no idea what I was gonna paint. I just started with a waterfall, and the end result looked really, really cool. And if you haven't seen it yet, at masterpaintingnow.com, it's in my art blog. You might have to go down quite a ways to find it, but you can also search, I think. But anyway, it's the one with the two women that are jumping off the, well, one's jumping off the waterfall and the other one's standing at the top of it. Really cool. It came out looking like a place that could really exist. It was different than anything that I've seen from Bob Ross, because it was from my imagination. Now I'm just adding some of the shadows back into, if you find that you ever overwork your bushes, what's nice about digital is that you can just go right back in there and add some shadows. When you're working with the Bob Ross technique traditionally, this can be very difficult, because the paint is so thick that if you try to add another thick paint and add some shadows back in there, then it can actually turn to mud. So you can always try to add some shadows back with a thinner paint, but you really want to get good when you're working traditionally at just getting the bushes down the first time. Don't overwork them. Leave a lot of darks. It's better to leave more dark at first than what's needed. And then after you put in your bushes, you can go, okay, you know what? There's a little bit too much dark there. Let's add just a little bit more brush taps, a little bit more bushes marks, and then it'll look right. So I recommend, less is more at first. Very easy to overwork it. Added some more branches here before I added in the lighter colors for this tree. I'm using bush number 1 now. I like using this for when I want more detail, like I want it to look like it's closer to the viewer. And this bush works good. And when I use this bush brush, I'm just little tapping and little, just like half circle motions. I'm just putting down just a little bit of paint at a time. And I'm making sure to leave space between each of my areas that I'm adding in that color, because I want that dark to remain there. I want those shadows to be there. If you look at any tree, no matter how bushy and fluffy it is, it's going to have these dark patches, because there's some parts that are sticking out further than others, and those parts catch the light, and the parts that aren't sticking out as far don't catch the light. They create shadow. So you're always going to have this no matter what. And on the left hand side, I added a more darker color, so more of a darker orange color, and more of a yellowish orange color on the right hand side, so that way the bush tree looks like it has depth to it. And now I'm using the same tool, the mountain texture brush, to create this like path. It's kind of like a dirt path. And this brush is so versatile. I literally use this brush the same way that Bob Ross uses his knife. Use it to make rocks, dirt paths, the texture on mountains, the little edges of dirt patches on like an island, or that part that that's right there on the edge of the water. Little, I don't know what that's called, but the edge, just a little bit of mud / rocks on the edge of any type of thing that's sitting on water. And now I'm going to go back in my bush number 4 brush and just add some bushes here. What's nice about having this dark background is I can just work right on top of that dark background and let that serve as the shadows for these foreground bushes, because they're the closest to us, so they're going to have the most contrast. That is, their shadows will be darker than any other shadow in the painting. And I'm also using more green here in the foreground because this is closest to us, and so objects that are closest to you, you can see more of their natural color even if it is a sunset. And it kind of just adds this kind of surreal look that Bob Ross gets in his paintings. And if you see this painting, this is from season 1, episode 3. It has that very surreal look to it because he just smashes in colors that really wouldn't be there if you were to go there in person and look at a sunset like this, or take a photograph. But that's okay because paintings don't have to be like real life. That's what makes paintings awesome to me. I like the fact that paintings deviate from real life often. If I'm just going to paint exactly what I see and make it look just like what I see, then I have a camera that will do that for me and do it much faster. So even if I'm trying to paint more realistic style, I'm still going to have some abstract, and I'm not going to paint like every leaf I see and things like that. And I'm going to mess around with the colors because I want it to be different than what I see. I want it to be aesthetically pleasing. And this is the bush number 2. I like to vary up the textures here. So the other tree, notice I used the tree number 1, or tree number, I think it was 4, then 1. This one I used 2, then 1. It just adds a little bit of variety to my textures in my trees when they're right next to each other like that. I also make them different colors so that one stands out from the other. The darker color looks like it's set further back, and that's why I paint the green one right on top of it, because it's coming forward. It's closer to us. A little trick that Bob Ross uses a lot, and a little trick that you can use. It really works for just about anything. Just changing some of the color here. I figured I needed like kind of a more happy little orangish bush here. Nice, relaxing bush here to kind of just change the color variety a little bit. Then I'm just going to fill in some more of this dark area with some bushes. And sometimes you want your water to be very subtle, especially on a sunset. So notice the water just sitting back there in a very subtle way. Adding some more variety. This is always good. It's always good to have variety in your bushes and trees to, even if it's just a different shade of green. You don't want every tree and every bush to be the exact same shade of green, or even necessarily the exact same color. Maybe one's a little bit more blue-green, one's a little more yellow-green, one's a little bit more orangish-green. Just change, even if they're all green, at least change the type of green that they are. Because these bushes are even closer to the viewer, I'm using the bush number 1 brush to add more detail. I decided I want to paint a little bit more mud here, or dirt rather. Now, in reality, this would be very dark. This trail of mud, or dirt rather, would be very dark. And I decided that I wanted to deviate from Bob Ross here. I wanted my trail to look a little bit more orangish and yellow because that's more how it would look, but I'm choosing to exaggerate that for artistic effect. You want to be very light-handed with this brush so that you leave some of that texture that it does all on its own. It's kind of like using a knife with light texture, and it causes the paint to break, and you get that nice texture. And that's how Bob Ross is able to, with just a few strokes, make a path look like it has all kinds of texture in it, or make his mountains look like they have all kinds of divots and texture. I like to just sometimes just feel the relaxation of the painting. And just sit there and relax and watch it. Now finally adding the bushes that are the most closest to us, using a mixture of number 4 and then number 1 bush brushes. And I'm going more yellow, kind of a dirty yellow for underneath, and then kind of more of a brighter yellow there on top. And again, this is something that wouldn't happen in real life, but that's okay. Using that same textured brush, basically it's a textured knife. Not that knives are, well, it's just a knife brush that used with the light hand will allow the paint to break, as you saw there. The paint broke at the end of that stroke and you get all that nice texture. Just kind of adding in a rock here. And instead of using grays for the rock, we're using these kind of brown orangish colors because of the sunset. Then we're going to add a little more bushes back around the rock so it looks more natural, like it's just sitting there between the bushes. Again, I changed my colors up here, so I used more of like an orangish base that time, and then dropping in some kind of yellowish with a little bit of orange in there on top. And really the painting's pretty much done. At this point, you know, you can maybe add a few more bushes there in that dark area of the water if you wanted to. Add a little more variety to your bushes if you want to add a little color, more of color variety if you notice that there's not enough. And then finally, I like to add some sticks. And if you're working traditionally, you just use the edge of the knife and just kind of cut into the bushes. Or you can use a very thin paint that's almost like ink. Just thin it down with some thinner, or even thin oil, and then just with a liner brush just go in there and just create some little twigs, little sticks and twigs everywhere. Kind of just brings the whole thing out, and it kind of sets some of those other bushes back into the background more. It's really an end touch that I feel that if you skip it, your painting just feels like it's missing something. So by adding this last little touch here, it really does make the whole painting kind of come together and feel more alive. And I always add people to my paintings, so you'll notice that in the beginning there was a hiker that's walking down this path. I like people in my paintings, so after I finish a landscape, I think of, okay, what can a person or persons be doing in this painting? What could I be doing if I was in this painting? And I figure, you know what, some early morning hikers or late night hikers, they started hiking before the sun set. Now the sun's setting and it's getting dark, and they have their light with them just in case. And yeah, just kind of like that. I've done that. Went out hiking and had my flashlight with me just in case, because I knew that. And then I sign it here with my favorite color, fuchsia. But yeah, those. I would sometimes even go on night hikes. It was already nighttime when I started, and just have my flashlight and stuff and go hiking in the woods. And some people find that spooky, but I found it really relaxing and nice, hearing the owls and stuff. I decided that I want to add just a few more things here, some highlighted twigs. So this is simulating more as if I was scratching into the canvas with the knife. So if you want these lighter colored twigs, you don't have to paint them with the color. Just, if you're working traditionally, just scratch into your canvas. If you're working digitally like I am here in PaintStorm or Krita, then I just pick a light color. Notice it's very desaturated. It's more toward the middle of that color wheel there, the color square. But it looks very, very bright because all the colors are dark. So you don't want to overdo this. You don't want to use too bright of a color. Just bright enough so where it stands out. And I use a very light hand, so these twigs aren't too bright and aren't too thick. It breaks with this brush. You'll notice that each twig kind of has a breaking pattern to it, and that adds kind of a texture to the branches. I like that. And I'm just looking at the painting now, deciding if I feel it's done. Like, I'm already done watching Bob Ross, but now I'm just deciding if there's anything else I can do to it to just kind of finish it out. And I figured that the sky looked a little too dark to me, so I wanted to blend this out some more. And again, remember that you're not, especially when you're painting in the style of Bob Ross, you're not necessarily going for realism, like even when it comes to colors. You know, realistically, the sky is not going to be that dark during a sunset, and neither would this whole entire scene be this dark, but it looks really nice. It's a really cool, starting with that dark canvas and leaving a lot of that dark in there, I think gives a really interesting, surreal look. And it's just nice on the eyes to look at. And a lot of these kinds of paintings, they sell very quickly because people like them. I remember back when I was a kid, I saw a lot of these paintings that were painted on like black velvet and stuff, or dark canvases, and they're very popular. I'm not sure how popular they are today, but I'm sure that human taste doesn't change that much. So I'm sure that if someone saw a painting like this, they'd be like, oh, I really like this, it's nice. I decided I want a little bit more reflections in my water, and I'm using my actual water brush, which I don't do that much anymore. I use that more tree brush, which is more like a fan brush. It's very universal, the same brush I use to make my trees. But here I decided to use the water brush and just add some little highlights, and then just go back over it with some darks until you get that nice balance between highlight and not. I'm kind of adding in the shadows of the trees. You got to think about how close the trees are to the water, because something that's far away from the water is not going to reflect in the water. But something that's close, and these are closer to the water, are going to reflect in the water. So I just added their loose reflection there in the water. Something that Bob Ross didn't do, but I felt that adds a little something to the painting. It's one thing I definitely do different than Bob Ross. I like to add more details to my reflections. And sometimes he did add more detail. It's all a matter of how much time. He's limited to about 28 minutes. And so he does, he cuts corners and stuff. But sometimes when the painting is more simple, he would add the bush, add bushes and everything into his reflections. Now I'm just using that water edge brush and just very lightly going across and adding just little water lines using a pretty dark color. As you can see there, it's really toward black there, and then I'm using now one that has a little bit more light, a little more lighter color for the right where that sun is hitting the water. And this is where the water has little ripples in it, and it creates an angle of the water that the light reflects off of it into your eyes. And it's usually the color of the light. So in this case, the light when the sun is setting is very orange, so orange yellow, so that's the color you're going to see. On a sunny day when the sun's out at, I don't know, let's say 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the light that hits the water is going to look almost pure white that bounces off the water. Alright, so we're going to call this painting done. Thank you for watching. And if you're on the ASMR channel, I hope that you enjoyed this as a nice, relaxing ASMR video. Please subscribe, leave a comment if you've liked the video, and share, because if you've liked it, I'm sure other people like it. Until next time.